Each Saturday, the chief economist at the MB Fund, MB Super, and of course, a man or one of the men behind the great, and we love this, macrobusiness.com.au, economy, finance, news website, opinion website, macrobusiness.com.au, worth a look. I check it out every day. I'm talking here about Leith Van Onselen, who joins me on the line.
I'm good, thanks, Luke. How about yourself?
Not bad at all. Did you go away for Easter or what did you do?
Mate, I'm actually still away. I'm actually calling you from the Gold Coast, from a hotel. So there you go. That there is dedication, mate.
That is right there. That is what we call dedication. The housing disaster that you've been talking about for years and you and I have been talking about on air for over a year continues, but this week it takes a critical turn.
Yeah, mate. Look, this is going to seem like Groundhog Day because I think, every couple of weeks you and I seem to talk about the same sort of stuff, but it just keeps getting worse. So as listeners might recall, the Albanese government has a target to build 1.2 million homes over 5 years. So that requires 20,000 homes to be built per month. But on Thursday, the Australian Bureau of Statistics released dwelling approvals data for February. And what that showed is that the construction rate is actually, or the come-in construction rate, because these are approvals, are running around 40% below the government's target. So only 12,400 homes were approved for construction in February in trend terms. So that's once you take out all of the monthly volatility. And that was the poorest monthly reading since April 2012. And on that run rate, Australia would only build 149,000 homes a year, which is 91,000 below the Albanese government's target. Now, this is obviously problematic because the federal government is running, obviously, a huge migration program. And we saw the nation's population swell by around 660,000 people from the year to September, off nearly 550,000 net overseas migration. So basically, we've got the population growing at an absolutely insane pace, at the same time as actual construction levels falling. And we all know why that is. We've got high interest rates, obviously. We've got materials costs have gone up about 40% over the pandemic. So builders can't make a profit and they're going bust. And at the same time, builders are having to compete for labour with the state government's massive infrastructure projects, which are required because we're growing the population so aggressively. And as a result, we're not building any homes. So basically, it's just an absolute diabolical situation that we seem to talk about, a couple of times a month, but it just keeps getting worse.
So what about in New South Wales? There are only, 45,000 homes approved for construction in the year to February? Is that right?
Yeah, that's right, mate. So, yeah, I'll give you some local data because obviously talking to New South Wales/Sydney audience. So New South Wales, only 40,000 homes were approved for construction in the year to February. And that's against the population increase of 186,000 in the year to September, which is the latest available data we've got. So that's basically an approval rate of about one home per 4.1 new residents. And for those of you living in Sydney, which is obviously most of New South Wales, it's even worse. So in Sydney, only 31,200 homes were approved for construction year to February against a population increase of 147,000 in the year to June last year, which is the latest available data. So that's an approval rate of around one home per 4.7 new residents. So this is why we have a rental crisis, right? We're not building enough homes. It's obvious. And if anything, this data I've just given you, Luke, actually is downplaying the situation because data released this week by the Department of Home Affairs suggested that Australia's immigration has continued to rise even further. So we only have official data up to September last year nationally and up to June last year across the capital cities. Mm-hmm. But what this data that was released this week showed was that in February, Australia had a record 713,000 international students in the country. Mm. That's way more than we had pre-pandemic. Mm. And at the same time, the number of temporary migrants in Australia also hit a record 2.8 million in February, or 2.4 million if you exclude visitors, which is probably the fairer comparison. But even so, that's 400,000 more than we had at the peak pre-pandemic. So the Albanese government keeps telling you, we've got too much temporary migration, we're going to cut it out, we want permanent migration, not temporary, etc. But we're getting more of both. And we've got record numbers of temporaries and record numbers of permanents. And basically this data makes an absolute mockery of the Albanese government's latest, immigration forecast, which were released in December, which said that Australia's net overseas migration would fall to 375,000 this financial year. It's going to exceed that by a massive margin. Mm. Like, I'd be surprised if it's closer to 500,000 because it will come down over this half. Well, we think it will. But, as usual, the population's growing a lot faster than what they thought, and it's happening at the same time as obviously the housing construction is collapsing. And so
the point to make here is, in addition to everything you so eloquently put, that approval rate of around one home per 4.7 new residents, that leaves aside someone who gets to the age of, let's say, 21 and wants to leave home and rent their own place. That leaves aside any marriage breakup, forcing one half of the marriage to find somewhere else to live, go and rent a place, turn up and think, geez, I haven't been in the rental market for a decade. I remember what rent used to be. They walk into an agent and they collapse on the floor hearing how much rent is now and the availability of properties. I mean, this assumes that no one in the country will change their living circumstances. So it's so much worse than 4.7, isn't it, mate? And I simply don't accept what the Prime Minister has been saying, which is, the population is smaller than was projected by the former government in its budget in 2019. I think that's conveniently leaves aside the pandemic, conveniently leaves aside how we haven't got the ability, as you pointed out, to build things, how we haven't kept pace with infrastructure, roads, schools, hospitals, all of that. I mean, that's just that's laughable what he says there. This is all on him.
Yeah, it is. It is. Look. So Prime Minister Anthony Albanese was questioned this week. Why, about these temporary migration numbers. So he got asked. We've got temporary migration at record. We've got record number of international students. This is going against what you said. And he said, oh, no, but the population's still smaller than was projected in the 2019 budget by the former government. Therefore, it's not a problem. And a prominent immigration commentator called Abul Rizvi came to their defence and said the same thing. He said, well, the population smaller than was projected 4 or 5 years ago. Did they have a housing plan back then? It's like, well, it's a completely different circumstance, because if the pandemic hadn't come along, we'd be building a lot more houses than we are now.
Of course.
Because materials costs wouldn't have risen 40%.
Yeah.
We probably wouldn't have as high interest rates. And, we wouldn't have had builders going bust left, right and centre. So it's a stupid argument. And it's sort of like Dan Tehan, the opposition immigration spokesman, sort of said it quite well. He gave a good analogy. He said, well, if you hit roadworks when you're driving, say, from Melbourne to Sydney on the Hume Highway, and you're stuck there for 20 minutes waiting at a stop sign, you don't then drive at 200 kilometres an hour to catch up, because that's unsafe and it's whatever. Brilliant. And we're pretty much doing that with immigration. So we obviously had a pause over the pandemic, and then the federal government's just tried to get back to what we supposedly lost, which is a stupid argument anyway, because immigration was too high pre-pandemic.
Yeah.
And at the same time, none of the supply side of the economy has been able to handle that, obviously, which is why we've got rental vacancy rates at 1%. And we've got rents having risen 38% over the pandemic, almost all of that since the borders were reopened. And we've got people being forced into group housing. So your whole point about changed circumstances, if anything's going the other way, Luke, I mean, people are now being forced to live in group houses, which they wouldn't have had to do otherwise.
Yes.
Or they're being forced to live on the street, which they wouldn't have had to do otherwise.
Yeah.
Or they're being, obviously pushed in massive financial stress. So we've got to make no mistake here. This has been deliberately engineered by the federal government, who's engineered a record immigration rebound after the Jobs and Skills Summit into a supply-restricted market, which was an absolutely stupid policy decision. And that's why we're suffering the worst rental crisis in living memory. And it's going to continue as long as the federal government continues to grow the population aggressively while the supply side is completely stuck.
Yeah.
And we all know the solution here. Like, they can talk about supply, we need supply, whatever.
You were saying you can say all you like about supply, and we do need supply, but there is something they could do now, isn't there?
Yeah, that's right, mate. So it's just, it's a crazy situation. This is not a demand problem. It's the fact that we're importing renters hand over fist to compete with local renters and causing the supply.
Good on you, mate. Get back to your holiday. Thank you for joining me from the Gold Coast and allowing me to interrupt things, and we'll talk to you in a week's time. It's Leith Van Onsel and macrobusiness.com.au. Look, there's lots of people dirty about lots of things, including, where's me $275 for me power bill? Fair enough. But this deliberate engineering of a rental crisis, remember, a third of us own our homes, a third of us are paying off our homes, and a third of us are renting. Now, the rental situation is abysmal. Highest rates ever, lack of supply, all that kind of gear. The $275 off your power bill is an issue. But in my belief, my firm belief, the engineering of this rental crisis by, this fiction about, we're going to import plumbers and builders and things. 600,000 people, 1,000 plumbers is what we read last year. 1,000 plumbers. We've got to build 1.2 million homes. Here's 1,000. Wow, that'll be good. This makes them, in my humble opinion, unelectable. And as you go around without seeing houses being built, also have a look at new roads not being built, new hospitals not being built, extra classrooms not being built, new doctors not opening new surgeries. I could go on, but you have heard it a little bit before, haven't you?